One of the ways in which I think about infrastructure is that it is to a place what a skeleton is to a body. It's what gives it its shape and its strength, and it is what enables it to function effectively. And it's that focus on function which is so important, because infrastructure doesn't exist for its own sake. It's there to enable other things to happen. So that is why infrastructure is so critically important. And of course, when it comes to macro infrastructure, the really big structures and facilities that benefit so many people, including the whole of society, it obviously falls to governments to invest in that. So if we want to function effectively as a society, it follows that we have to invest in the right kinds of infrastructure. So why is it so difficult? Why is it so hard? Diane said in her opening that, we have quite clearly underinvested in infrastructure, and I don't think people would argue with that. Well, no one except me. I will make a small caveat that I think we do some parts of investing in infrastructure very well. I think historically we've done some very good things. I think our harbours are a great case in point. And I think on some of the sort of slightly smaller or mundane scales, we've got a couple of examples. For example, our road infrastructure and our seawall infrastructure, not to be confused with non-sea defence infrastructure like Landcras anti-tank wall and the wall, Napoleonic wall at Fermain. But we do have a very proactive approach to maintaining those critical bits of infrastructure, and that proactive approach really pays off. It pays off economically, and it pays off in all the many other ways that infrastructure is important. And that brings us back to why infrastructure is so difficult for governments to invest in. And one of the reasons is when you're talking about that big macro infrastructure that is multi-generational, those structures that are built to span generations, it's expensive for a start. And that's a really difficult thing for politicians when taxpayers' money is understandably very tight. But there's an inherent tension as well with the kind of generation-spanning nature of macro infrastructure and the very much shorter-term horizons of political cycles. So you can understand why some politicians really struggle looking beyond the horizon of the next 4 years and understanding what the next generation and indeed generations are going to need. But we do indeed need to do that. And our forebears did manage to do that very impressively. So really, I hope that is one of the big themes that is going to come out of this afternoon. I hope that we can get some excitement about the possibilities that investing in infrastructure can bring. And remember that it is all about that enabling function. The payback isn't, of course, always monetary. And indeed, it's not even always economic. There are so many benefits to different types of infrastructure in social and environmental ways as well. So it is absolutely critical. Now, when I first tried to, successfully brought an amendment to introduce a climate change policy to Guernsey, that was back in 2019, I think, round about then. And I was talking about Greta Thunberg. Don't worry, this does become a little bit more relevant. She had a famous call to governments around the world to act like the house was on fire. And very quickly, very soon after I was making, or just before I was making that speech, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris went up in flames, and Greta Thunberg indeed found herself there. And I looked into Notre Dame and how it was built. And one of the phrases that Greta Thunberg used, which really struck me at the time, was this idea of cathedral thinking. Because Notre Dame Cathedral it took 200 years to complete. So the people who started on that project knew that they would never even see it finished. And yet they were determined to put in the time, the money, and the effort to see that through for the benefit of so many generations to come. These days, thankfully, we can tend to get projects delivered a bit more quickly than that. But I do think that we need to apply the same mentality. I think we need to use 21st century cathedral thinking. We need to think big. We need to think about what infrastructure can do for the island and all the things that can enable looking to the future. And I think with specific reference to the bridge is a bit of infrastructure, and actually the area of the bridge wouldn't exist without the foresight of the people who built the infrastructure to actually make it into a very functional and very important area of the island. So I'm greatly looking forward to today's panel session, and hope that we can come out of here with some enthusiasm for what is possible and not dwell too much on that classic problem, I think, in politics especially, where we understand the cost of everything but the value of nothing. I think we need to think beyond that and really go big in terms of our infrastructure horizons. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Most of you know me. I'm Rupert Dorey. I'm a former president of the Chamber of Commerce, and until 5 years ago, I chaired one of the largest London-listed infrastructure companies. So, Lindsay, I have to thank you for a tremendous introduction, counter through infrastructure. It was really incredibly succinct, and you touched on a lot of really important points. So thank you. So before I introduce the panel, I just want to talk in sort of concept about infra in just a little bit more detail in terms of what it is. I mean, by and large, infrastructure are big physical assets, usually. They're facilities that provide support for essential public services. Broadly speaking, the sectors be compartmentalised into what I describe as social infrastructure, which is things like hospitals and schools and so on, things that by and large don't have any income stream attached to it. You can put things like roads in there as well, ports and airports in some instances, depending on who the owners are. And on the other side is the economic infrastructure, which is probably what we're more sort of concerned about, which is the utilities, which is the communications, waste, water, and also sort of transport as well. And these things typically do have income streams attached, and that's important because that opens up a whole other panoply of opportunities, and particularly in terms of things like financing and so on as well. So basically, infrastructure they're large physical assets, they're very capital intensive, they provide an essential service, they're not easily replicated, they have a positive economic impact, and they typically last over a very long term. And long term is not just 10 years, 20 years. I've been involved in projects that have been contractually signed up for 125 years. And an example of that would be the London Super Sewer, which is being built at the moment. It started in about 2015, it's due for completion next year. It's a tremendous project, but it's an example of very long-term thinking, which transcends all of those things like economic cycles, political cycles, and demographic cycles. And clearly, it's probably one of the most, aside from the obvious HS2, which is a complete debacle and so on, it really is one of those projects that picks up where the visionaries of the Victorian era left off. And I just leave that with you, because please think of infrastructure as supplying very long-term benefits and not always necessarily the ones that are obvious from an economic perspective. So, I mean, there's a number of key features of infrastructure projects that one needs to appreciate. Firstly, identifying a need. Understanding what problem you're trying to solve, how you're going to deliver it, how you're going to spec it, and also explain how you're going to get value for money from this, and or other attendant benefits as well. And also, are these assumptions reasonable compared to alternatives? I mean, the client side, usually, a government possibly, or otherwise, has to be absolutely clear in terms of how they want to achieve their end objectives. And typically they can do it themselves. Or alternatively, they can farm it out to someone who has expertise in pulling together all the different threads and complexities of infrastructure development. And you may well have heard of things like design, build, finance, operate, and so on. Is a plan that's is a structure that's well used in the UK and elsewhere. And clearly, one needs technical expertise. You have to have clear objectives. It's important to probably avoid too much change of scope, because that increases costs. Avoid over-speccing. And avoid complexity, and typically overall, actually, as a proxy, very high levels of capex typically mean too high levels of complexity as well. I mean, the project developer would typically be sought by the client going out seeking proposals from various, or invite RFPs and so on from various suppliers and so on to fulfill fulfill the optimal route towards achieving the end goals, ensuring there's a clear alignment of interest between project outcomes and financial outcomes. There are clear benefits for having external experts and so on. Typically one could say they have stronger drive, greater levels of expertise, and they can offer that objectivity and arm's length sort of distance from the project or from the client itself. One aspect of infrastructure that is absolutely crucial for achieving a successful outcome is to have buy-in from the public as well. This cannot be underestimated. If you get the public behind you and they can see the clear benefits of what you're trying to achieve, then you're a long way there, which is absolutely crucial. I'm going to introduce the panel now, and we are fortunate to have panelists from JT, Guernsey Electricity, and from the Guernsey Development Agency. So I'd like to invite them to come up here and I'll introduce them individually. Thank you. Just before I introduce them, I just want to say a little bit about the financing and so on of infrastructure. I mean, broadly speaking, there are a number of different sources and so on. If one's talking from a corporate point of view, clearly you've got retained earnings. From a large corporate point of view and governments and so on, obviously one can access things like debt capital markets and all its particular guises, and clearly from a Guernsey perspective, then clearly the Guernsey bond and so on is just one example of that. Banks typically do a fair amount of infrastructure lending, or typically not much longer than 10 years or so. They don't like to exercise their balance sheets too much, and that introduces other areas of risk, such as refinancing risk, halfway down a project cycle, which is something which one typically wants to try and avoid. More recently, you've had the emergence of private debt providers. These are basically non-banks. These are things like insurance companies, pension funds, annuity companies, and also increasingly private equity balance sheet lenders. I mean, I'm talking here about the big global ones like sort of Brookfields, Apollos, KKRs, Carlyle, and so on and so forth. Now, those guys have vast balance sheets, which they're now putting into action and to provide very competitive finance outside sort of the banking, outside sort of the banking market, and they're incredibly competitive as well. From a Guernsey concept or perspective, one might want to look at opportunities that could arise from the Guernsey, the International Stock Exchange here in Guernsey, a creation of community bonds. Again, I'm speculating here. There's an awful lot of downside potentially in doing that as well, because these are not typically your regular savings type products and so on, but so that one has to tread with care. And clearly, there's also the Guernsey Infrastructure Fund, which is managed by Ravenscroft as well, which typically to date has tended to stick with property type investments, but has been looking for more core infrastructure type investments, which have been relatively hard to come by late. And in a Guernsey perspective, scale is really important, because infrastructure stuff is big, and I'm talking big here in the I'm just to contextualize this. If we were to put a new cable directly to France, a nominal capex would be around 100 million or so. That is a small project in the context of infrastructure investment from typical providers in the UK or elsewhere. I mean, typically a capital structure on this would probably attract 3 to 5 million of equity, which is like a drop in the ocean for these guys, and the rest would typically be done with debt. Clearly, some of the stuff we're going to be looking at and talking about would probably fall well below those sort of parameters. We can also look at other models that have been used locally as well. I mean, for example, the States of Guernsey you'll be aware that the slaughterhouse was a underused asset in the middle of St. Peter Port, which was doing nothing, and they were approached by a local company, Randalls, to take it on, spend money doing it up in concession, with a 25-year concession for right of use. They spent 7-figure sums doing it up, and after 25 years, the ownership will go straight back to all the benefits of that investment will fall straight back to the States of Guernsey, who will have got a totally refurbished, fit-for-purpose asset again, which they otherwise would not have done. But it worked from a commercial perspective. So looking at potential projects like that and reusing existing assets is something that is well worth looking at, is something that we also need to consider as well. So that, broadly speaking, sort of set the scenes of what infrastructure is about, how it can operate, what opportunities there are for putting in financing and so on. But I'd like to lean on our panel members now, and I'll introduce them all. On my immediate left here is Simon Kindal. He is one of the 3 directors of the recently appointed Guernsey Development Agency, charged with looking at development opportunities in Guernsey. Next to him is Darragh McDermott, who's the JT's managing director, and I'll be talking to him presently about what they've been doing in Jersey. And finally, Alan Bates, who many of you already know, who's the Managing Director of Guernsey Electricity, the latter of which is going to be crucial, particularly in the context of the recently approved electricity strategy, which has set the direction for which Guernsey is likely to go. So if I can kick off with sort of JT, I mean, JT has recently undertaken a huge investment in its own fibre network in Jersey. Dara tells me that JT now has one of the fastest broadband networks in the world, and it was one of the first jurisdictions in the world to do that. And so I'd just like to ask him, can you describe some of the lessons that you have learned from this extremely ambitious undertaking and give us some insights into the sort of problems that you faced in rolling out that investment? Oh, you've got to press the mic.
I'm all over this technology. Thanks, Rupert. I guess there's a few things to kick off with. One is, I was struck by Lindsay's introduction because it's spot on in terms of investment in infrastructure is the bones and it's the things that enables the body to function and whatever else. And it's crucially important that you pay appropriate attention to it. And when we rolled out fibre in Jersey, listen, there was a whole load of reasons that it made sense. But crucial in there was, the company had a vision in terms of how this would benefit not only the company, but really importantly, the jurisdiction. Okay, because incumbent operators like Alan's, like JT, they work well, when people make use of them. And if you're gonna make use of things, you have to keep it up to date. You have to continue to invest, and that cycle of investment is really important. But when outlining, what to do and the vision for that investment, as I say, it was really important to make the decision, but then be allowed the room to get on and do it. Because rolling out these infrastructure investments, it's hard. It's really, really hard. And I'm not sitting here looking for sympathy, but what I am saying is that it takes time, it takes effort, it takes a lot of coordination, and you have to have patience. But you also have to trust the people that are in place to do it. So, I have the chair of JT, Mariel Infesti, is in the room this afternoon, and she and the board rightly hold me and the executive to account for rolling these things out and getting them done. And on our head be it, okay? And if we fail, then we lose our jobs, and if we succeed, then we're congratulated. Brilliant. But that kind of trust of, okay, make the decision and then get on and execute is really, really important. The other kind of few things are, back to that point on, it's in the interest of the jurisdiction. Having good infrastructure, whether it's water, telecommunications, roads, whatever the case, electricity, that's what, in my view, and what's shown in economic studies, that's what those jurisdictions that have those things well and those things right and continue to pay due care and attention to them, they have a platform to succeed. They have a real platform to succeed. And then it's over to industries, other industries, to make use of that capability, that functionality. But on our side of the fence, myself, Alan, the others, we kind of provide it and then encourage others to make use of it, and not let it sit there and waste away. That point on care and attention is also appropriate, because if I look at it from the other end of the telescope, if you don't make the appropriate investments, you run out of road. Okay, and we've seen in the UK recently the concrete in schools crumbling and so on and so forth. If we stop investing in electricity or telecommunications or water today, you won't know. You won't see it for years down the line, okay? But you will, as I say, run out of road. And to recover that, you suffer worse services, you suffer slower speeds, you suffer a lack of coverage, you will suffer, and that impacts the jurisdiction, the economy, and the ability to get on and thrive. So there are the few kind of opening remarks I would make. Rupert, I can talk all day, by the way.
No, sure, okay. I'm getting that feeling.
Yeah. But there are the few kind of opening positions that I would set out to try and contextualise.
In any rollout, you're going to get a lot of challenges and uncertainties that develop. Were there any in particular which you had to dig your heels in and on certain decisions, clearly with some of the obstacles that you face, whether they're political or technical or financial?
Some of the obstacles were just customer experience. And by the way, we made mistakes. When you're rolling out, it was a £60 million program of work. We made mistakes, but that's where did we make the same mistake twice? No. So learning and getting on is a really important thing. So there's a little bit back to that point around patience, trust that we're doing the right thing, and patience to let us get it done, and then hold us to account.
So what were the sort of key strategic decisions that you had to make to ensure successful rollout? Oh,
the key strategic decision was, and this is for the kind of the rollout in Jersey in particular, because we're kind of government owned by 100% government owned in Jersey. We wanted to make sure that this wasn't seen to be a JT thing that we were doing to the jurisdiction. So we wanted to make sure there was a joint buy-in, and you used this in your opening remarks. There was a joint buy-in that this was this is for the greater good, okay? And then when we've had long discussions with the government in Guernsey in relation to rolling out fibre here was absolutely crucial in our view, and we've been saying that for many years, and we're delighted as the Deputy Ender in the Economic Development Committee signed it off a few years ago now, because it is the right thing. And what we were saying at that time, was, do you know what? Sure, as the incumbent operator, are probably the best people to roll this out, but if they don't, someone has to, and we're happy to step in. So they're the kind of few remarks on that point.
So, having done all this work and delivered it successfully, overcome a lot of issues and so on, what are you seeing are the principal benefits that you've achieved from an economic perspective or from an island-wide perspective? Are your expectations being realised?
No, is a very short answer.
Why not?
Well, I think at one level it takes. I was critical in a recent speech to the Chamber of Commerce in Jersey, where I made the point that we've got the fastest speeds in the world, and it's not just me that's saying it; it's a recorded fact. But I was saying we've the fastest speeds in the world, and what we're seeing is people buying more stuff on Amazon and watching more Netflix, and that's not going to move the needle. You gotta. We're not experts in other industries. But we can help and facilitate, and what we need is those other industries to start taking advantage of that. And government, what I see government in Guernsey and Jersey do now is start to push those boundaries and those challenges. And I think it's up to industry to stand up and see what the opportunity is and then deliver upon it.
So, here's a great example of fibre being the skeleton.
Yes.
And once the core structure is in place, it's up to others to take up the running and deliver their side as well.
Yes.
Enablement is utterly crucial.
Yes.
And clearly, one can speculate what sort of industries might follow, but I've heard AI gets bandied around a lot these days and stuff, and clearly connectivity, and particularly extremely fast connectivity, is a crucial part of that. So
yeah.
One can speculate on how that might develop. So now that you've fulfilled your side with full fibre coverage and so on, what other sort of strategic initiatives are you considering to try and sort of roll out or perpetuate the success of the delivery of your first stage?
Well, there's part of it is we run a Channel Island network, so the work we're doing in Guernsey and across the Channel Islands is, as you say, about making use of that. So in a few weeks' time, we recently signed a contract with Ericsson, an £85 million contract to invest in a brand new mobile network across the Channel Islands. And what we're doing, and this is a learning from what we didn't do with fibre perhaps, what we're doing is we're bringing Ericsson experts across to present to industry leaders in Guernsey and present to industry leaders in Jersey and just show what can be done, just to whet the appetite, so to speak, and get people thinking more broadly on, not just faster speeds to do the same thing we're doing now, but how much you change other industries. And that's down to other industry leaders, back to that point on making use and enabling.
JT is a Jersey-owned based company and so on. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach the financing of the investment and so on as well? I know from past conversations with you and so on, you've had experience of borrowing from direct lenders such as insurance companies, pension funds, and so on. Can you just talk through some of the sources of finance that you used aside from sort of retained earnings?
Well, for the rollout of fibre, essentially, and again, as I said earlier, it was back to making sure this wasn't a JT project being done to the jurisdiction, that there was buy-in, and part of that was evidenced in the financing, where there was a waiving of JT dividend for a number of years. Now it cost what it cost, and it had to be funded. So the funding mechanism was almost just a way of seeking or rubber stamping or evidencing that buy-in from government as well. So it played a slightly different role than might normally be the case in a funding decision.
Thank you. That's a great example of investment that has taken place, that the projects have been managed and delivered and so on, and clearly the full benefits have yet to be realised. Moving on to Alan here as well. Clearly the recent passing of the electricity strategy sets a new direction in terms of where energy markets are going and energy infrastructure as well. And I just invite Alan just to talk a little bit about the capex challenges that you face post the approval of the electricity strategy and how you will use that to manage the energy transition. Drawing on your experience of where you might finance that from. Obviously the States of Guernsey is well known for being somewhat short of pocket at the moment and so on, yet you have these gigantic challenges to face. Can you give us some sort of insight into how you're going to manage that process?
Well, let's start off with the electricity strategy. So approved last month, really good result. But we're not starting from a great place. So I keep saying to everyone that actually getting the policy letter through was actually the easy bit. The difficult bit is actually going to be doing something with it. So where are we starting from? We're starting from a point where we've mentioned it, underinvestment, and there's a fear we're going to say the same things here, but we have quite substantially underinvested in the electricity system in Guernsey over the last decades. We can't change that now, but we are starting to see that even for provision today's service. So we're seeing more customer minutes lost, as in cable faults. We're seeing more customers we can't connect because there's not enough capacity in the grid. We're seeing the power station having to run more in the winter now because the demand's increasing. So it's not the greatest place to start, but at least we understand that. So I think there's a certain challenge in terms of catching up in terms of investment before we even start thinking of growth. But when we get into that, we are going to have to become a bit braver as an island in terms of making investment decisions. There is no risk-free investment decision. There will always be risks around investments. What we need to become much better at is being agile and flexible and managing those risks more appropriately. I think then we can crack on. We've got lots to spend. Certainly, we've identified a couple of 100 million just to do low carbon capacity and security supply for the island. So this is just investment in the grid, the power station, further interconnection, before you even get on to, investing in more local renewables. The question on funding, it has come up quite a lot recently, funding the energy transition, particularly around it's an extra 1.7 billion more than we're going to spend anyway. We're going to spend this money. We're going to spend a couple of billion pounds by 2050, even if we do nothing. So what we should be focusing on is how do we spend that money really effectively and how do we spend it wisely as an island. So it's not about are we going to spend it, it's on what and when. And I think the key here is really understanding if we're going to fund it, how we can make that most affordable for the island, because generally most of these infrastructure projects are on the border of being unaffordable for small communities particularly. So it's about how can we fund it in the most appropriate way. I then come into the question of whether it's a taxpayer. I wish it was the taxpayer paying for it, but the energy policy was very clear in 2020. For us, it's particularly going to be the energy consumer, so that's either the existing electricity customers or the energy market. And in terms of whether it is affordable or not affordable, we're currently going to now carry out the sort of financial modelling to work that out. Once we know that, we can then look at what the sources of funding will be.
How are you approaching issues like this, the future procurement and delivery of some of these complex projects, and what sort of timescale do you expect?
So there's been a couple of issues. Certainly, obviously, Brexit and Ukraine war hasn't helped the procurement market at all. What we've basically found is everything is much more expensive, and everything takes a lot longer to be procured. So there's some real challenges now, and I heard the other day, the first slot, even if we wanted to order a new subsea cable today, the first available slot is 2029, the first available production slot. And that's because the market is really red hot now in terms of offshore wind, all the cabling that's required there. And, the capacity within the market's just got to improve. So there's going to be some real procurement challenges. Another example, just a simple grid transformer. It used to be delivered in about 14 weeks, now takes about 52 weeks to be delivered, and it's about twice the price it was 5 years ago. And these are big challenges, So when we were talking about just even the sort of baseline catching up capital investment, it's a lot more than it was 5 years ago. So there are some real challenges.
And do you are there any concerns that you have in a sort of Channel Island context, or Guernsey in particular, over there's any comparative advantages or disadvantages doing infrastructure on an island such as Guernsey is concerned?
So I think for all the infrastructure companies, obviously economy of scale is one of our biggest issues. And you mentioned earlier the cable project being quite small in terms of big asset investments at 100 million. But the complexity is exactly the same as whether it's a 100 million pound cable project or a 2 billion pound cable project. So economy of scale is always a big issue for us. Again, resourcing now is becoming more of a problem for the island in terms of getting the right skills and competencies into the island to deliver these types of projects. So, yeah, there are challenges, but I think there's lots of opportunities. We should be quite nimble and quick as an island. We should be able to do things really, really quickly to take opportunities in the market or with technology. And that's probably an area we need to focus on. I know when Lindsay and myself always talk, there's always a natural focus on where electricity comes from. But as an island, we need to be much better at how we use it and how we use it wisely. So demand side management for us is a big area we need to start thinking about, because that's where we could be really ahead of the curve. As an island, we could really deliver big changes quite quickly by understanding how we use electricity.
Yeah, I mean, the electricity strategy throws up quite a lot of sort of collateral type issues in terms of potential projects and development opportunities. One of those obviously is retiring a lot of your old diesel engines and so on, which are way out of date and which you fire up once in a blue moon and which spew out nasty stuff and so on. And obviously, they're well past their sell-by date. The implication of that is that you're going to need a lot less space, I suspect, assuming a new cable is put in and you can adopt the N policy instead of N-2. And that creates many collateral economic benefits, not least from alternative development opportunities in what is essentially very valuable space, waterside development space and so on, which is indirectly a consequence of the electricity strategy, but which is also a sort of useful segue to Simon to talk about what sort of opportunities can be created in St Sampson's in particular as a result of these developments. Now, Simon has a long bit of background in property financing and development in the UK. He's also been a partner in one of the big UK legal firms, specifically in respect of property and development opportunities and so on. He has been mandated, along with his two other sort of co-directors, to explore development opportunities for Guernsey, particularly on otherwise better known as East Coast development and so on. And clearly, they've only been in place for 3 or 4 months or so. They have been busy people, though, and they have sketched out a number of ideas on which they would like to sort of to flesh out. And clearly, part of that process is eliciting sort of feedback and so on from the likes of yourself to help them fine-tune and hone their ideas, both in terms of their delivery, ability to realise avenues for development and opportunity as well. And I just wonder, by way of introduction, so whether I could invite Simon just to reveal some of the opportunities that we may be looking at.
Guernsey Development Agency, enhancing our island is our strapline. Not building all over it, but how to make the most of our assets and how to make this a better place, how to drive the economy. Businesses and economies are not very good at standing still. They need to move forward. And that's what we're about. We're trying to help and enhance what's going on here. we are very keen to make sure we make a great success of it. We don't want to cock it up because we want to remain living here. And so there is a lot of pressure on that. Buy-in was the word mentioned earlier, and completely get that. One of the first things we did was speak to Jersey Development Company, so our counterpart in Jersey, and ask them, you've been going 5 years now, what is it you know now that you wished you had known on day one? And the answer was, speak to the people. And that's why we've been spending so much time speaking to as many people as we can. And for this is a great opportunity for me to hear from you about the sort of things that you want to see here. I would make the point, we're a new birth. We've only been running just under 3 months. We're not yet 3 months old. I think we've achieved a reasonable amount in that time. So audience participation time. I'm going to ask you some questions, and if you'd be kind enough, please, to raise your hand if it's applicable to you. I'm only be talking about St Sampson. There are a lot of other things we're going to be doing, but this is the bridge and St Sampson. So, hands up, please, if you've been to St Sampson's, been through St Sampson's in the past 7 days. Yeah, okay, yeah, it's a pretty good show. That's 2/3 of the people have been through St Sampson's. Okay, how many people in the past 7 days have stopped in St Sampson's? Yeah, okay, not so many. Who's eaten or drunk something in St Sampson in the past 7 days? So your hand goes up very quickly. And you're alone. It's only 3.5, 4, 5, 6 people. Okay. Who has bought something in St Sampson in the past 7 days? Yeah, not many. Not many. Who's been to Vale Castle in the last 3 months? 3 people, 4 people. That's 3 months. The whole of the summer, 4 people have been to Vale Castle. Do you believe we have sufficient sight of the water at St Sampson? There are 11,400 square metres of space around the harbour on dry land occupied by boats. 11,400 square metres. I've got the maths if anyone wants to check them afterwards. Do you feel you get an adequate sight of the water when you go to St Sampson? Hands up. Who thinks it's good? 1 person. Good. Excellent. Brave man 2. John. Excellent. Okay, so most of you think you would like to see, actually it's not quite the same, you'd like to see. You think you're not getting sufficient sight of water. Griffith's Yard. It's covered with builders' scaffolding, builders' materials, and our much loved and cherished yellow poo lorries. Do we think that's a good use of such prime land, which has beautiful views over the islands? Hands up, anyone love that one? Thinks good? You're a builder, sir. Well done. Excellent. Do you feel our marine industry, which is important to this island, deserves a little support to allow them to contribute even more than they do at present to our economy? Yeah. Yeah, not many. More hands going up. Good. Good. Who believes no changes are required in St Sampson? Good. Nobody. Who believes we can do better in St Sampson? Yeah. Well done. Good. Okay, so the idea is to see what we can do to enhance, regenerate St Sampson from what it is at the moment to make it something even better. I actually really like St Sampson. You go up and look at the bridge and you look at the quality of the water. It is superb. It's very clear. It's got that lovely, lovely colour. But we want it to be more than a place you just drive through, somewhere you want to visit, somewhere you want to eat, somewhere you want to drink, somewhere you want to stay, to live, to work and to invest. So that's the aim. How are we going to do it? where do we start? There are two key things we've got to do, first of all. One, we've got to reduce the blast zones. There are 4 blast zones, and we would like to remove 3 of those. People don't like investing if they might get blown up. And they also don't like investing if they're going to get wet feet and all other bits wet. So we need to find a way of enhancing the flood defences there. And the thinking was, let's have a look at Black Rock. And if you look on the north side, you'll see a lot of granite sticking through at low tide. How about putting a new harbour wall out there? Using the space inside as a greater area to keep ships, maybe some bigger boats, pleasure craft than we have at the moment. And let's put on some gates at the entrance to stop flooding in extremely bad weather. And also to keep a sill to keep all the water flowing out so that the boats don't hit the bottom. More boats, more revenue. College of Further Education, I think, has got a place here. Our marine engineers, those who want to learn the industry on this island, have to go to the College of Further Education, which is a great place, and I'm not in any way knocking it at all. But to learn about boats, you have to learn about automobiles, because that's the course that we run. It's a small island, fine. But for the boat bit, you have to go to Bournemouth. How about we have an extra class that deals with boats? And we get people from Bournemouth, St Malo, Cherbourg, England, to come over here and see what a great place this is and have their course on marine out here. Let's not just spend our money overseas. Long Hoog. All those boats, 11,400 square metres, why don't we put them on dry racks in Long Hoog? Keep them out of the way, clear the area around the wonderful harbour and the water area. And there's an urgent need for light industrial. Little 1,000 to 2,000 square foot sheds with a little mezzanine office. We need about 20 of those. They don't give a good return, but the island needs them. We've got people sharing space because they're so desperate. So we need to do something about that to help the island economy. Traffic. I can't imagine you enjoy the slow trundle through the bridge, trying not to knock people over, that really rather strange parking area. Why don't we put a bridge across from the south side to the north, past the clock tower on the seaside? Why don't we put that? It's shorter distance than this, the length of the room. Probably the gentleman with the camera plus 50%. That's it. It's not a big step to take. So we have the traffic going across there and then cutting north, not going round the bridge. Now, we're not suggesting we should stop traffic going to the bridge. People need to go there to shop. Old people particularly want to park their cars, get out and buy their goods, get back in their cars. But we can do a lot to make it a lot better place. We can make it a little cul-de-sac, so you can come round from the south side and you stop at the north. You can park there, but you can't drive through. So it's not a drive-through place along the bridge. And then we need some more car parking. So let's put that, how about putting that behind creases? Maybe a multi-storey car park. So we keep the traffic off the bridge and we make the bridge something that looks pretty good. Slimline, rather like the Millennium Bridge or the otherwise known as the Wobbly Bridge in London, which I was involved with. I have to say it was the best free tourist attraction you could get. Thousands of people going across in the early days, trying to see how much they can make it wobble. We'll try and avoid the wobble because it needs to take articulated lorries, 40 tonne both ways, and of course a cycle track and a footpath. But we can find a way of making that work. Restaurants, cafes, bars. We've cleared all the junk off the side and helped to enhance the marine industry to a purpose-built area. which is better for doing what they need to do. Why can't we have some restaurants, cafes, bars? People can sit out, they can walk around the waterway and enjoy it. That's part of the gross national happiness that the Bhutanese king talks about. Equally important for buy-in. Guernsey Electric, fantastic news about the second interconnector. There will be some space, we hope, in due course, which will be freed up. Why don't we use some of that to help build residential? Why don't we have three-sided Georgian squares, a couple of those? Not close to the front, but it's not going to be like a ghetto, some of the southern French tower blocks. We're thinking of three-sided grass in the middle, open space, open to the water so that people can see the water. My friend Rex over there is very keen on trying to solve, as a whole load of other people, what happens to older people. They want to trade down. They want to leave their family house, their 4 or 5 bedroom house. They really want to go to a 1 or a 2 bedroom house. What accommodation, which is good for someone who is old. It's on 1 floor, all the appropriate supporting facilities to go with it. And the reason they don't move is there's nowhere to go to. They can't find anywhere they want to go. Yeah. So let's put one of the blocks for older people with some support facilities behind. Not a nursing home, but just so there's someone on hand to come and help out. Absence bosom, let's do something with that, shall we? How about a restaurant? Bit of public realm area. You go back to what was done a lot of development agencies. People like London Docklands Development Agency, they were challenged for being autocratic, but they were very good at design. Good design doesn't generally cost. So let's have good design. Let's have lots of public realm. Vale Castle. Why don't we have that as a place, a go-to area? People will go there rather than having the chain across saying don't go. Every village in France has somewhere for the kids to go and play, free, a roundabout, swing. We don't have it other than Chouet Beach. So why don't we have that here? Why don't we make it some fun for the kids? Why don't we have a water maze in St Sampson, possibly at the bottom of Vale Castle, similar again in St Peter Port, so the kids can go and have some fun. How do we get there? The shuttle, a little bus that goes up and down continually, cheap, eco-friendly. People will only get out of their cars if we can find a quicker alternative. It's got to be quicker than the cars, and that obviously has loads and loads of challenges. We could spend all day on that. So trying to reduce explosions, flooding, stop through traffic, areas to walk, drink and drive, enjoy the harbour, housing. Does it sound a bit better than it is at the moment? Good, great, okay. So I think the answer is St Sampson, I think we feel presents. It's a real gem, but together, and it is a community effort that's needed here, we can give it a little clean and really get it to start to sparkle. Okay.
I told you it was a big subject. And obviously we're overrunning a little bit, but obviously this has just given you a taste of the sort of opportunities that may exist in St Sampson's in terms of its context, St Peterport, in terms of its place to live, in terms of development opportunities, all of which Simon has told us is early days. But I just wonder if we've got a short time now for a little bit of Q&A, and then I'll invite Bob Beebe to say a few words, who are our sponsors today. So if anyone has any questions specifically on infrastructure or about the St Sampson's development opportunities in particular, please feel free to go ahead. And there's a roving mic which Rachel will bring round. James.
A question for Alan, really. We heard from everyone about the co-development work with Jersey, and to the point about skills. To what extent can pooling skills with Jersey with regards to the energy transition strategy help deliver? And I'd be interested in your thoughts on a scale from sort of literally shared labour to sort of shared corporate models for delivering it as well.
Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation in the state debate around that sort of collaboration or cooperation across the islands. And there are some challenges in achieving that, but I think we're all coming to terms with the fact that resourcing is a massive issue as we move forward, and the competence of that resourcing as well. And even now we're having to look further afield to get like HV design engineers. I know Jersey Electricity have exactly the same issue. Traditionally we'd always expect them to come from the UK. There isn't enough in the UK. So I think that is a big issue. But I think some of the opportunities around technology development as well across the island, where it's not, one island's not quite big enough to do it on its own, but there's opportunities for you joined together, and certainly the Channel Line transmission grid is an example of that. So I think there's lots of opportunities to work together. I don't think that's just limited to Jersey as well. I think there's opportunities to work with Alderney. Alderney are quite well advanced in terms of some of their implementation of renewables. They're thinking around renewables and smart grids. They're probably slightly ahead of Guernsey, in fact, in terms of the smart grid. So there's opportunities across all the islands.
Hi, this is directed at Simon. I loved your picture of providing more facilities for children and the community at large. I was worried about your grass in the middle of the Georgian squares, and I'm coming to trees, especially with climate change coming across us in leaps and bounds. France, and you mentioned France, has these wonderful, in pretty much every town, these little squares that are surrounded by trees that provide a canopy for the community to eat under, play under, gather under. So I would really encourage you to include that in your plans.
Absolutely, as well as clean, eco-friendly designs. And indeed, going further, schools in France tend to have a canopy for the kids to play underneath to keep them out of the sun.
Question for you, Simon. Well, not a question, actually, an observation, using the analogy that Lindsay made about skeletons and infrastructure and so on. Well, I think if Guernsey was going to its doctor, it might suggest a couple of new hips and then maybe a knee. How are you finding encouraging investment in various properties that the states own, given that the level of lease is probably 25 years maximum? If I was investing seven figures like Randall's did, I probably wouldn't even go anywhere near it. So for a return on my investment, how do you get over there as a development agency?
I think the answer to that is possibly different in different parts of the island. For St Sampson, it needs a rebrand for people to understand why it's sensible to invest there. At the moment, it doesn't look so good. So a whole rebranding operation is going to be necessary to persuade people that's the right place to go and spend their money. St Peter Port is going to be a lot easier, I think. Your question about 25-year leases, I'm trying to work out, can you clarify exactly what you meant by that? You're saying...
Spending seven figures, sorry.
40.
If you're spending seven figures or more in some cases on a particular project, look at the slaughterhouse. Frankly, they've spent seven figures, they've got it for 25 years, and then the States of Guernsey gets it back at the end, beautifully renovated. I think that's a little unfair. As an entrepreneur and a businessman, I wouldn't do it.
So I think the answer to that, isn't it? Yeah, people only take risk if they obtain profit, and there needs to be an appropriate split of profit. I wonder whether we use enough mechanisms like overage payments, where you set out what is the base case, what does the private sector expect that it's going to receive from this investment, and make a payment on the basis of that, strike the deal on the basis of that. But if, as one hopes, the private sector do really well, then they share a proportion of that good luck with the GDA. So, yeah, completely open-minded to splitting the spoils in an appropriate and fair way.
One other question to Alan. Do you see any future in maybe having some sort of allegiance with Jersey Electricity?
All the islands have got subscale utilities. I think even in Europe, they sort of don't even think you're a proper utility, so you've got at least 100,000 customers. So even if we added every customer across the whole of the Channel Islands, I don't think we'd top out at 100,000. So I do think in the future there's an opportunity for definitely that collaborative working piece. And, James mentioned corporate structures. There might be a corporate structure in the future that will allow the islands to work more closely together. I do think though, one of the challenges of that is that we need to be able to ring fence infrastructure, transport, health, education, those types of areas, so they can never be used politically, potentially, as levers against each other. So I think there's a sort of constitutional piece around that as well.
I think Darragh would just like to add a comment.
Yeah,
as
I
well.
mean, for me, it's interesting you touch on the kind of politics at the end. Trying to take the politics out of it, to my mind, is actually part of the answer, and just getting people to work more together. We run a Channel Island network, and actually, not, although we're owned by the states of Jersey, we've an independent board of directors who were interested in just getting stuff done, rolling out networks, serving customer requirements. And actually, the less politicians have to do with that, in my view, the better, and put the onus on business leaders to get on with stuff.
Well, actually, that seems like we're kind of running over time a little bit, so I just wanted to say a few words by way of sort of summing up before we hand over to Bob. And just contextually, with Guernsey's GDPs, give or take 3 billion or so, by most reasonable metrics, infrastructure spend should be around about 2.5%, 3% of GDP. That equates to about a stabilised investment rate of about 75 million plus a year. We are way below that. We have underinvested for years. So, I mean, the message is stop procrastinating. We need to take action. Also, from a public perspective, don't get too stuck in the detail. You need to focus on the big picture, the long-term benefits. And finally, public engagement is absolutely crucial to carry these sort of initiatives through. And for those who are sort of keen on the finance side of stuff, there is never a right time to invest in infrastructure. I mean, you could look back just after the global financial crisis and say that would have been brilliant because money was pouring out of everywhere with quantitative easing, interest rates were plummeting, and then you could look back to sort of pre-COVID, it's fine, and then it wasn't because you want to stop doing something because COVID happened. Right now, the macro environment has changed, and interest rates have gone through the roof, but the reality is you're looking beyond next year, you're looking beyond 5 years, 10 years, much further than that. So the reality is just get over it. We have to deliver, we have to do something, and your support in initiating these sorts of projects is going to be absolutely crucial. I'm obviously very enthused by the opportunities at St Sampson's. It could be a fantastic place. It's been hopelessly underinvested for ages, and the opportunity for connectivity with St Peter Port and the opportunities for development in St Sampson's, which would represent a stunning seaside outlook for a town, which in a Jersey context would be equivalent to St Albans or Gorey and so on. And we know how nice those are. It would be wonderful to have something similar here, and it's something that I think would benefit a huge amount of people in Guernsey, and I think it's something which we should all get behind.